Post-fight video, Joseph Parker versus Bowie Tupou. Now unfortunately this post-fight video probably won't last as long as some of my other Joseph Parker post-fight videos. The reason being, if you haven't already watched the fight, it lasts less than a minute long. So there aren't too many angles, there aren't too many discussion points to go into when we're analysing this one. First things first, I thought Bowie Tupou weighed in and looked relatively good actually. He didn't look as heavy as I heard that he potentially may be. He didn't look like he had completely given up the ghost and given up training whatsoever. So I was slightly encouraged when I saw him after the weigh-in. In terms of the fight itself, how it kicked off, Tupou was kind of using tactics, I guess you could say, reminiscent some ways of a David Tua type fighter. Obviously he's a slightly lower level operator than David Tua. I'm not saying they're like for like, but he wasn't necessarily dissimilar in terms of the way he approached the fight. You know, he was trying to get low, he was trying to use a lot of head movement, he was trying to come in and land power shots and really put it to Joseph Parker very, very early on and test his mettle. To be fair, that's probably the best tactic for Tupou, was to try and get Parker sucked into a war, use his power, try and catch him out. Realistically, the guy had very, very little chance of outboxing and outpointing Joseph Parker over 12 rounds, so I don't think it was necessarily bad tactics from him. Now in the first 10-15 seconds of the fight, he pretty much ran at Joseph. I watched the footage on YouTube, I didn't watch it live. There was a very slight pause in my video. It was only probably half a second, but it was ever so slightly out of sync, the footage. But to my eye, it appeared that at one point Bowie Tupou caught Joseph Parker with quite a big punch when he sort of pushed Joseph Parker back on the ropes. And it was interesting to see, because obviously Joseph Parker was coming into the fight cold, I guess you could say. Like, there wasn't any time for him to warm up, and he had this guy really sort of running at him, charging at him, and sort of bringing the battle. So it was interesting to see. And initially, Joseph Parker's back foot game, it didn't look seamless. Obviously, I'm judging this based on about 8 or 9 seconds of action. But I thought after the first 15-20 seconds, potentially this could develop into an interesting matchup. Because, I mean, this guy was coming forward pretty much like a rugby player. It was almost wrestling as much as boxing in terms of the action inside the ring. So yeah, it was very, very interesting. Parker, after about 20 seconds, sort of settled down, got involved into his boxing, was able to keep the reins a bit more, and then effectively threw, I think it was a right hand, which just collapsed Tupou. Now when I first saw it, I kind of thought to myself, what on earth happened there? I didn't actually see a punch land. And I had to watch the replay 5 or 6 times. But Parker's hand speed is such that the punch was so quick. If you kind of watch it in live full speed motion, it is quite hard to get a full perspective of actually what happened. But essentially this hand comes and it kind of catches Tupou here, like on his head, sort of the top of his head and kind of on the back of it. He's bending down. He's coming in low, like I said he was doing, and Parker just kind of almost catches him like here on the top of his head. I don't think Parker's aiming to do that, but because Tupou is kind of bending down and leaning forward, it ends up just kind of catching him on the top of his head, and Bowie Tupou goes down and basically is kind of folded like a deck of cards, to cut a long story short. So yeah, I mean, I looked at the footage on YouTube, and a lot of people were commenting, this was dive. He obviously felt Joseph's power and wanted to get out of the fight. To my mind, this is just one of those things that sometimes happens in heavyweight boxing. I mean, anyone who watched David Price versus Tony Thompson 1 will know that when you've got men of that size and that athleticism punching each other, things can happen. And there are parts of a head, around the back of the head, maybe behind the ear, on the temple, that can affect the equilibrium and leave people knocked spark unconscious, and that seemingly was the case in this fight. It wasn't necessarily the cleanest punch Parker's ever thrown, it wasn't necessarily the hardest punch he's ever thrown, but the way it caught Bowie Tupou was You know, real rock solid, and was enough to get the job done. You know, he obviously just caught him in the right place or the wrong place, depending on which side of the fence you sit on, and got the job done. Now, I think there was some disappointment from fans, you know, they'd obviously been very much waiting for this fight, very much expectant of it, and were slightly disappointed it was over so quickly, and I get that. But from a perspective of someone sitting here in the UK, Bowie Tupou, I know he's got a bit of a name and a bit of a reputation, you know, in New Zealand and Australia, etc., as being like one of these big punching types. But for me, he was only ever a big puncher at quite a low level and against quite a low level of opposition. So I never really, and I don't, if you've seen my pre-fight video, you'll probably get this impression, but I never really viewed him as a threat, and I was confident Parker would get a KO. I didn't think it would come quite this quickly, but nevertheless, you know, Parker's hand speed, Parker's power is a threat to all. And I think, you know, potentially, even though this fight was, let me phrase it this way, I don't necessarily see Tupou as a step up in opposition from some of the other fights Parker's been in with previously. Not to say it's a step down, but I just don't necessarily see it as a step up. In terms of where he goes through next, I still have a slight concern about Parker defensively. I'll need to re-watch the fight on a different stream, but it was unclear whether Parker got caught early on in the fight. I thought he probably did, which was slightly concerning against a fighter like Bowie Tupou so early on in a fight. You know, as I always say, it becomes a bit repetitive when I do these Joseph Parker videos, but the guy's so young, such a bright future ahead of him. There's just no need to sort of, you know, take any risks, no need to throw him in at the deep end at this stage of his career. And, you know, they're building him nicely, slowly ramp up the level of opposition. And, yeah, Bowie Tupou, maybe he's a top 50 level operator. Maybe let's start moving him to that top 40, top 35 bracket now and see how he develops. Anyway, Parker goes marching on, another win, another early stoppage, making some waves in the heavyweight division. If you're watching this, please comment, let me know your thoughts on the fight. More importantly, let me know your thoughts on who Joseph Parker will be fighting next. Thanks for watching, hope you've enjoyed the video. If you'd liked it, please subscribe. I wouldn't want you to miss any of the stuff that I've got planned coming up on the channel. Thanks very much.